So, Marina, it's great to have you here today on the Digital Frontlines podcast.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming out.
yeah, you're kind of a legend in our industry. So I'm really humbled for you to join us today. You're the former CTO of the VA, Veteran Affairs,
Yep.
and you're also the co-author of Hack Your Bureaucracy, right? A book about like a powerhouse book. I mean, it's really mainstream now, right?
We appreciate it. Nick and I
Yeah.
really tried to write something that was really practical.
Yeah, absolutely. Just navigating the complexity of the U.S. government,
Yeah.
right? And then you also co-founded the Digital Service. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We did. There was a vision for a long time of how could we attract more private sector tech talent into government, similar to like how your clerkship at the Supreme Court is viewed as like an extremely competitive, high profile role.
Yeah.
How could we make an equivalent of that in the technical sector? And so they would have different names, different opportunities. And then speaking of not wasting a crisis, when healthcare.gov didn't work out quite so well.
Yeah.
That really opened up eyes. So we had so many plans up to that point for like position descriptions and hiring mechanisms and things, but they were, trudging their way through the bureaucracy. But when healthcare.gov happened, that was really our moment to say, okay, we're going to jump on this and create USDS.
And that was at the White House.
Yeah. So USDS started like a White House team and then one agency team because we weren't sure like what the right configuration was going to be. And so I ran the first agency team at the VA, and then there was also USDS kind of headquarters.
Wow. Okay. And then so from there, you were at the VA after that, after you started that, or you're kind of in the VA as that
I
digital
see what you're
service
saying.
was
We
going?
were planning what later became USDS when I was at the White House in the office of the CTO. But then when healthcare.gov hit, I had just become the CTO of the VA a few months prior. And so then it was like, all right, I'm going to be here and kind of catch the first agency team.
Yeah.
And while the headquarters team gets started by a different team.
Yeah, that was crazy. I remember that. So I was on the Jenkins project. For those of you who know, that's DevOps, right? And it's an open source tool. And so I remember when healthcare.gov, the RFPs were coming out, and I was like, they got to use continuous integration. It's a modern technology, but we didn't get selected for our bid, and they probably hard coded everything when they first did it, right?
The challenge with healthcare.gov, among others, was that there were so many different players, and there was no lead, there was no conductor of it, right? So suddenly we go to launch day and everybody has technically completed the requirements on their list, but nobody had tested them together. And surprised they did not work together, because in technology there's always stuff that happens that you can't foresee in a requirements document, no matter how long it is.
Right. You got to talk to the users, right?
Yeah, also that.
Yeah. So so you weren't always in government, though. Tell us that story. We're talking a little bit before the podcast here about kind of how you came from commercial industry into the government.
I was not only was I not always in government, I think government is about the last place I thought I would be.
Yeah.
I was minding my own business here in Seattle. I was a Salesforce integrator, actually. I worked a lot with private companies. I love efficiency. I love automation. And so I wanted to bring that. And I was, minding my own business, and I heard about the Presidential Innovation Fellows program was starting, and Todd Park, who was CTO of the U.S. at the time, had put out a call at TechCrunch Disrupt for some tech-savvy entrepreneurs who wanted to come in and disrupt government. And I thought, like, oh, that'd be so cool, but also I would never be picked in a million years. So, but it said if you sent in your resume, they'd add you to the email list.
Yeah.
And so I thought this was some crazy federal government requirement, like you can't even get on a mailing list without a resume. But I sent it in. I didn't expect to hear anything. I actually had sort of a crisis of confidence at that moment where I was like, have I made bad life choices that I wouldn't even be considered for this kind of really cool opportunity? Fast forward a few months, I got a call from Richard Kulata, who was at the Department of Education, asking if I was interested in being his fellow there. And this was on a Thursday. And the caveat was I had to move to DC by Tuesday.
Oh, wow.
And that was crazy enough that I was like, all right, I'm going to go for 6 months. I'm going to prove to myself that like government is irrevocably broken. You can't fix it. And then I went and learned the opposite. I learned that government is actually this amazing place where you can get so much done and you can impact so many people's lives. And
so much.
I was hooked.
Yeah. It's like, as an efficiency person, it's just like, it's endless because there's
it was
just
a
so
buffet.
much. Yeah, it's like a buffet.
Yeah.
I was actually, my story's kind of similar. I was reading that book by Mick Kirsten, Project to Product.
Yeah.
And I was in Yosemite, and I had no cell phone reception. And I read this whole book, and I was talking about how he, kind of his story a little bit about how he helped telco and fintech and all these companies, but he also helped the U.S. Army. And I was like, I just wrapped up a big fintech, built a top 5 app for a bank, and was up here in Seattle for a few years at our big telco here in town. and leading transformation there, but I hadn't had the the government experience yet, or I went to the Citadel military school, but I didn't have I never wore the uniform. So this was like, I was like, this would be a great opportunity to do that. And I get out of Yosemite and I get a phone call from the U.S. Space Force. And they're like, hey, we saw you online. Love to have you come down to Space Systems Command. And I was like, this is my calling.
So cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So Marina, before we dive into all the heavy stuff here, let's, I'm curious on, like a cultural, like a hack that you did or had some success with that stuck, that really sticked and is still thriving today. It's something that kind of one of your stories from your book, or maybe, just throughout your career of a hack that you were able to really navigate the bureaucracy and get done.
Yeah. I think one that stuck probably the most would be if you looked at VA's digital transformation. When I started at the VA in 2013, almost no veterans, this was surveyed, almost no veterans trusted the VA. Almost no veterans would recommend the VA to others. And our digital experience was crazily disjointed. We had over 1,500 websites, tens of logins. And yet, despite all that, you couldn't do hardly anything online. You could read some legalese about it, but you couldn't actually accomplish it. And so I did what I describe as the strangler pattern, which is you can't fix the VA. You can't fix the digital experience. But what one piece could we make better? And so I had sat on the bench at the Menlo Park VA talking to users because I wanted to understand more about the experience. And I was extremely lucky to meet this amazing woman. Her husband had been hospitalized at the VA for the past 9 months, so was quite ill. And so she had basically lived at our facility for almost a year.
And you're just out front on the bench.
I'm just sitting on the bench talking to her. I didn't tell her who I was not to lie, but just because I just wanted to have a conversation as people. And she's telling me, we had such an amazing experience. The nurses are incredible. The doctors are incredible. And as she's telling me her life story, because it was one of those conversations, in my head, I'm ticking through like, man, she's eligible for like tens of other VA benefits. And so I asked her, what other VA benefits is your family leveraging? And she said, what other VA benefits? And I was like, oh my God, you could live at our hospital and not know that we have disability and pension and education and automobile modifications. And so that was very eye-opening to me that we need some sort of navigation front door that you can actually understand all the benefits. So my initial play at that, when I started at the VA, I had no budget, I had no authority. People did not want to talk to me. They had their own plans and their own 5-year goals and their budgets and their strict requirements documents. And so I had to get my foot in the door where I could.
Because those were all program managers that had actual money tied to programs, right?
And also for those that aren't familiar with government budgeting, you have to figure out your, down to the penny, as years before.
Earned value management.
Yeah, so I show up and my budget had already been decided years prior and it was relatively immovable. So it was what can you do with what you've got?
Right.
And so the big bureaucracy hack that was fairly amazing for me then was I had my first opportunity to get some money. And it was going to be cost savings from a different project that wasn't going very well. But in order to get it, I had a week to move about 1,000 written articles off the existing website. And I had to put them somewhere else on the internet so that we could shut off the old website, not renew the contract. And then I would get some of the millions of dollars of savings. And millions of dollars was real money to me when I had $0.
Yeah, that's nothing in the government.
I know it's
right?
budget dust in theory, but to me, I was like, I can really do something with that. And but I was by myself. I had nobody. And I was lamenting this to the security guard on our floor. And then it suddenly occurred to me that he had a computer and a little bit of time on his hands. So I was like, hey, would you like to learn some basic HTML coding to help me move these articles over? And he was like, heck yeah, I'll come at lunch. And he came at lunch and he came with the security guards from every other floor in the building.
No way.
And so we did an HTML class. I beat the deadline with all of their help. Most of them then left for IT jobs. So we had a little bit of a security guard shortage at headquarters. But then I had a few $1 million of budget from this. And the hack there is really building the relationships and I hope I helped them too, right? They learned a skill. They had fun. And we were able to make a pretty huge impact in a couple of weeks. That I wouldn't have expected otherwise.
I remember in your book, Hack Your Bureaucracy, you talk about the quick wins, right? Not trying to kind of solve the big problem, the big transformation. It's just where those quick wins. That's really cool. It's a cool story. I mean, the VA is super important, right? We have so many veterans coming back from 20 years of war, and my dad was a Vietnam vet, 3 tours in Vietnam, and he's 78 years old now, and he's at the VA at least every week down in Las Vegas, right? All of his prescriptions and his medicine, and I'm always trying to learn about what services they have to help him out. Now he's got a nurse coming to his house that I just found out about. So
I'm glad he's getting I mean, he earned every last minute and dollar of that. So
yeah, I mean, the big one for me that I'm passionate about is the PTSD side, right? Where, it's an epidemic in our country. And for, me as a kid, my dad raised us out in Snohomish, Washington, in a log house out in the woods to get away from civilization after the war. And so he wasn't really treated back when I was a kid. So, and I have a lot of family and friends that are coming back from the war that with PTSD, and they're trying to solve that. So I'm super passionate about that. I have a organization called Mission 22 that to prevent 22 suicides a day. I think it's down to 20 now, which is a little better, but still not good. So we need to get the help there.
And the VA is the place to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the front doors, are they, kind of have that rolled out now? Is it they're using that a bit more?
It exceeds expectations. The VA actually, they won a SAMI, which was like the federal government Golden Globes.
Oh, wow.
For the best customer experience. Over 85% of veterans now refer their veteran friends to the VA and say that they trust the VA. There's a veteran experience office. And, my little website that had at that point, some plain language content and articles that we had moved on is now the single front door for veterans to manage and access all their benefits, get all their information. I'm really proud of it. And it's stuck. It's stuck through every administration. It's stuck through, various team members. Yeah. It's just a long time rolling off. I'm really proud of that.
That's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that's a good measure of success, right? As a change champion, right? You go into an organization and it's like, what sticks, right?
Yeah.
And I love those phone calls, years later of like, hey, Heath, like, that agile prioritization technique that you taught us, we're still using it, or program increment planning, we're really coming together and doing a lot more collaboration, right?
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So one of the books, there's so many stories you have in your book. One of them is called The Cobra Effect.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool. So for those who haven't read the book, tell us a little bit about that. But it's about the cobra problem in India, right? In British rule India.
Yeah.
And they had they wanted to try to get rid of all these cobras, and so they had they paid money, right, for people to get rid of the cobras. But maybe tell us about that and the lessons learned from that story.
I mean, this is a great lesson in perverse incentive. So yes, they had a problem with too many cobras that were harmful to people and animals. They said, we'll pay you for every cobra that you kill. And what ended up happening is people bred cobras to kill them to make the money. And I think people do not think enough about when you're making a new program or you're making any change of any kind. Like, what's a perverse incentive? How will people game this? A different way to look at it is I have a friend who's a product manager, and he thinks about like, okay, what if an evil product manager took over tomorrow? How would they accomplish my goal in a way that actually like caused net harm that people didn't want to see? And so I think it's very valuable to think about what are those. I mean, I'm obsessed with risk and incentive frameworks and thinking about how you use those to drive change. But then how can somebody game your incentive? Maybe you need a counter metric to measure.
I think like what I was hearing, what I was understanding was like you want to measure what matters, right? Which is another great book by John Doerr.
Oh, great.
Right. And then you want to do like a pilot, right?
Yeah.
So you want to get quick feedback, right? And set that, and then user centric, right? Like talk to the users and figure out like what you did on that park bench out in front, right? Like understanding what the value is and what their pain points are. I think that was the lesson that I took away from that chapter in the book.
Absolutely. And you have to go, because the moment you start working on a project, you start losing your objectivity. It's not that there's nothing wrong with you. That's just natural.
Right.
And at VA, it was, so many people that work at the VA are veterans. And it was hard to sometimes say, like, you are definitely a veteran and you have a veteran experience, but the acronyms, if you get stuck, you call Debbie, how the offices work. So your experience is different than that of a veteran that may be separating tomorrow or maybe hasn't been engaged in the VA in 15 and 20 years, but now needs hearing aids, which our research found was a real big driver of enrolling people in VA healthcare. And also there's just different kinds of people, different groups, different experiences. And we want to understand as many of those as we can so that we can meet them where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you balance compliance, procurement, and legacy systems while still trying to push forward with innovation?
Yeah. It's wicked hard, but what I've really learned is this is the work. So when I first came into government, I thought that the work was ignoring the compliance, going around it, finding like the quick path to success. And that doesn't stick to our earlier conversation. You can violate the rules once, possibly, and then there will be 10 new rules that keep you and everybody coming after you for making that kind of change. And so the magic, as it were, which is not magic, it's tractable work, is understanding what are the compliance requirements there, what are the systems at play, and then how can you meet the letter of the law or the policy. A couple things happen there is often I've found that when you dig into the root policy, you go to the law, the legislation, often there's a lot more flexibility there than people realize. And it's how it's been interpreted over time. Jen Paulka calls it the cascade of rigidity, that you might have a completely reasonable, sensible source requirement, but over time it's been made overly restrictive. And that can be changed. You could change that policy or that interpretation or that form. It won't be overnight. Yeah. But then if you change it, talk about sticking. Now the next person's going to have to change it if they want to do it a different way. And with the legacy software, I mean, I see this all the time. And today I am a crisis engineer in a partnership called Layer Aleph. And we get called in when people are having IT crises of various times. And what we see again and again and again is people see legacy software and they're like, the thing I have to do is get rid of the mainframe. Well, that is like a wildly rare occurrence. Most of Western civilization is running on mainframes. How can you work with the mainframe? How can you get it to spit out information in a CSV file that you can then import using CI/CD and into your new app? How can you sync that information back? When you think that the legacy technology is the enemy, you're already getting off on the wrong foot. And I have seen many, 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 many success stories of integrating with it. And then you use the strangler pattern again to slowly carve off piece so that it is not quite the single point of failure. Or if you do need something that's, a 24/7 thing, then maybe you can pull that piece off, or you can pull piece by piece. And then at the end, it's either something that you can actually live with, or then it's small enough to be reasonably replaced.
Yeah, I remember I have a kind of a crazy story where I had this program. And it was supposed to be agile. So Dr. Roper, if you remember him, he was in the DoD and he was the acquisition chief. Yeah. So he had this program, it's called 804 contracting. And so it's like rapid agile contracting in the DoD. And so I had one of the first programs, but they kind of a lot of the contract language was written with waterfall language in there. And so one of the things we have these things called DIDs, right, which are a requirement they have to follow. And so I went out to the contractor site that's developing this capability to prevent the bad guys from jamming satellites, right? And so I sat down with the test engineer, the lead, and I was like, "Hey, can you walk me through your testing framework? How are you testing your software?" And he goes, "Well, we want to do DevOps and CI/CD. However, the government said that we have to follow this DID." And he's like, "Heath, do you know what this DID is?" I'm like, "No, never heard of it, but tell me all about it," because I was new to the government at the time. And he pulls up this document, and it was written in 1968. It was like, this is how we're going to test software per this requirement. Yep. And I'm like, oh my God, right? And so I ended up going back to the program manager, the material leader, we call him in the military, and the FFRDC and all the leadership at the prime contractor, and I got him in a room for 2 days, took the whole contract and went through line by line, every procedural, every DID, every requirement, and I just played like gladiator style. It was like, I like it or I don't like it from an agile lens, right? And we were able to kind of cut a lot of that red tape and get out there, and then we were able to move a lot faster by delivering earlier, not having to build out 9 years of requirements, right? We can just start delivering. So
that's an incredible story, and one that people don't do enough is, first of all, you brought everybody together, which I often don't see. I think so many people approach bureaucracies or red tape as like, oh, there's an evil team, the procurement team, they're evil. They have these dumb requirements. They haven't updated them from 1968. Yeah. Well, nobody ever asked them to, or they don't know which ones are thumbs up and thumbs down. And so to bring everybody together, and then also to do, if we did routine reviews of, what are the 17 things we need to cut, that would be incredible. There's just no current muscle for subtracting.
Yeah, I think collaboration is huge. We get stuck in these silos. We have these siloed organizations, but if I was king for a day, I would say everybody needs to be on a cross-functional team, right? And you're delivering value, whether it's you're deciding what funding is or what requirements are, or you're on a team writing code. Yeah. You're on a cross-functional team. Absolutely. So let's pivot a little bit to technology. Where is there like a story or an example from the book or from your experience where, technology was a blocker for you? And, how did you kind of get past that tech and overcome it to kind of navigate the bureaucracy there?
Well, I have a funny story about change control. So a big barrier I had at first at VA. So I want to make a website that's like a normal website, and I wanted to have CI/CD, and I want to be able to update it. If there's a typo, I want to be able to fix that typo in 2 minutes, like I would be able to do in the private sector. But the VA had a change control board that required human beings to review your change, submit it on paper, and then they would take some number of weeks to approve it or not, and then that they would vote on whether or not you could put the change forward. So I could have Jenkins all day long, and that's not going to move these weeks along. And I will admit, I tried every bureaucracy hack I think possibly in my book before I arrived on the one that actually worked with this team. I mean, I tried taking them to lunch. I tried educating them about CI/CD. I tried like building trust, and they were like, hey, my job is to review the paper packet and then vote.
Yeah.
And at one point, somebody pointed out to me that I did need them to vote per policy, but I didn't need them to vote yes. I just needed them to vote. So I went back to them and I said, okay, what if as part of my pipeline, every single time I automatically include a no vote from your team, that you have never approved any change that I've made, and you have an automatic no vote every time. And they loved that because they thought my thing was risky and they didn't want to be associated with something that was risky. But it gave me the CI/CD that I needed.
Yeah.
And
what's CI/CD real quick?
Oh, sorry. Continuous integration and deployment. So like using tools that will automatically run a bunch of tests. They can even include like clicking, like click through the form and make sure that the form loads and that the field labels are what you expect to be, and hit submit and make sure that it shows up on the other side. You can write really, really deep integrated tests.
Yeah, for folks out there watching, right, it's being able to integrate your code frequently. So rather than wait months to get tests and get feedback, we're delivering every day, every hour, and integrating those tests, and then doing more release on demand. That's really the nirvana, is where your users are able to take code or take new capabilities as they need it. And so as technologists, you're building and automating so that they can you get into the arms of the user. So
and another benefit is an individual developer can run CI/CD all day long, so they're not taking up everybody else's time by suggesting code that breaks somebody else's work. So it enables much faster, more collaborative work.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I really loved about your book was this kind of concept of guiding coalition. So when I was at this big telco, and a lot of the agile transformations that I did outside the DoD, we had this kind of guiding coalition, right, where it's like this digital transformation office, or these change agents. And I remember we had like a room with a lock and key, and we had like every VP in the company's name on the wall. And we were like, okay, blue sticky note if he's awesome and a team player and a change agent, and he's yellow if he's like needs a little help, and red if he's like super resistant, but kind of strategizing on how to kind of navigate the complexities there.
Yeah.
Can you kind of tell us about that? I think maybe in the context of the DoD, because right now, Secretary Hegseth is really leading this transformation that he's trying to do within the DoD, and trying to create this kind of warrior ethos, and really bring that back to that the Pentagon's going to be so much projecting power that we detier our peer competitors, the PRC and Russia and China, right? So I think it's important that maybe we kind of talk a little bit about some examples of some of the folks in the Pentagon are watching today. What can they do to kind of build that guiding coalition and take some of the lessons learned from your work at the VA?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the strongest teams are the cross-functional teams. You definitely need specialization and expertise, but if you are an expert in a silo too long, you can actually become more of a problem than a solution, right? So we in the book call it the Karass, which is from Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle. And in Cat's Cradle, a Karass is people that God has hidden around the planet to accomplish an objective together. Now we're going to use it in a secular way, but I think so often, and certainly in DoD and at VA, we approach the organization as like, it's here to stop me. There's a bunch, I'm trying to do a new innovative thing, and there's a bunch of people that, and their job is going to be to slow me down, to get in my way, to point out a thing that I didn't do. And I think a much healthier approach is, who is hidden around the Pentagon who is going to help me with this? And at the VA, I mean, you heard the security guard story, right? I think that would not have been my top 100 guesses of ways how are you going to get your first millions of dollars of budget, Marina? I think the answer would not have been, obviously the security guards are going to help me. But because I frankly was just a human being and had a relationship with them as humans, that ended up being a superpower. I had similar, and this definitely applies at the Pentagon, with administrative staff. Like they are they control
oh my gosh,
calendars, they control resources. They know that, like, hey, don't put that in his briefing book this weekend.
I'm always bringing donuts and cookies and all the holidays, making sure their desks are decorated with all the right Easter candy, right? Yeah.
And one of my, and I admit I did this sort of accidentally, but I look back on it as a key point for me, was helping the administrative assistants with an IT challenge that they had. Should I tell that story quickly?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I first started at VA, as I mentioned, everybody's budgets and plans have been figured out for years. So nobody really wanted the innovative new person to come by. They thought I was going to be net disruption. And so nobody was really talking to me. And I sat in my office alone, and the head of the executive secretary pool popped her head in my office, and she said, "Hey, Marina, have you seen Green Pack 42? And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I am not doing anything else. I'll help you find it." And so we wander around. It's no Pentagon, but the VA headquarters building is also 12 stories and fairly large. And we're going around, and I learned that a green pack is any time that, like, DOD or another agency sends us a letter. It would go in a green file folder called a green pack. It would get a number put on it. And then everybody that had to weigh in on the official agency response would handwrite, their comments in the margins, and then it would get typed back up. But it also became apparent to me that the poor executive secretary pool was spending half their time wandering our very large building trying to find green folders. And I was like, ooh, what if I printed a barcode on the front of it? And then this being the VA, I don't know if the Pentagon is similar, but I, in this wandering, found a box of unused barcode scanners in one of the closets. We used to joke that the VA had 3 of everything.
So everything, all these stories are like, you're just scrappy. You're just like finding like little ways to
literally looking in closets.
Right.
And I said, oh, we could hand these barcode scanners out, and then people will scan the barcode on the front of the folder, and it'll tell you who last had the folder, and then you'll be able to find it. And I called it Folder Finder because I like alliteration. And my maiden name at the time was Marina Martin, so I was alliterative. And the executive secretary pool called it M-Boop. So M for Marina and boop for the sound that it made when they were scanning the folders. But they thought I was now like a tech god. Like I had solved this tremendous problem that they had. But from my purview, it was like 2 hours of my time and fairly easy, right? So I was able to do this kind of paperclip barter with them. And then I had a lot of political capital with one of the most important groups in the entire agency. And they helped me unlock, hey, here's how you can get to meet my principal. Here's go to lunch, go to coffee, meet on Friday, don't do Tuesdays, whatever the advice may be that really, really helped smooth that path so I could meet all of my peer colleagues. So I think that the parallel there at the Pentagon, wherever you are in the hierarchy, is proactively reaching out to the people in other areas as not even cross-functional, but like cross-divisional as you can. Some of the best relations, not just the executive secretary pool, but like our procurement team at VA was in New Jersey. Nobody ever went and visited them. They threw the contract over the wall, and then, hopefully, and they were great humans, but I made a point that anytime we had work, to your story earlier, we would go to New Jersey, we would sit down, we would build that rapport. And it was really a mark of honor on my team when you had a Rook coffee mug, which was from the one coffee shop in Eatontown, New Jersey, because it meant you had driven to New Jersey, you had spent time with the procurement team.
Oh, wow.
And they were, once you have that rapport, then working through things like, hey, page 17 from this old time, it really is a blocker here, and they could have a really rational conversation about like, oh, actually, we can remove that. We have authority to remove that, just nobody ever asked.
Yeah, I have so many stories that are like, I'm like, coming to my head, but one was we had this system in the Space Force to track all the debris. There's a lot of debris up in space, so we got to track all that stuff. And so it's like a $3 billion problem we've thrown money at over the years. 46 years we've been trying to solve this problem. And so there's this program, and they put me on it, try to see if I can turn this thing around. And so I just said, hey, who's the users? And they're like, well, you got to go to Vandenberg. And there's a guy named Bob up there at Vandenberg. Go see Bob. And so I go see Bob, and he doesn't want to talk. He's like, you guys, 46 years, what are you going to do, right? Yeah. And so there was this test. So he puts me in the ops floor, and he goes, why don't you read this binder, which is the old system that we built 46 years ago, so you can, understand it. I'm like, okay. So I sat there reading this, just Fortran code, like just, so I'm reading this big binder for like probably 4 hours. And he finally comes back and he's like, hey, are you finished? You understand that system now? And I'm like, yeah, I'm working on it. He's like, okay, that's good enough. Let's go to lunch. So then we go to lunch.
What a great test.
Yeah. I mean,
Brown M&M.
Yeah. He was like, wanted to see if I really had the heart to really dive in. So we go to lunch. He tested me a little bit, see if what I knew about that and in the program. And so I asked him, I said, hey, is anybody from the program office, come up here to kind of work with you and define your requirements? And he's like, I think a major came up here 2 years ago for an hour.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow. And so that was the beginning of the transformation there, where I had him as an ally, right? And then I brought him out to, to our program increment planning event where we brought all the developers there. And then I had him, I had everybody in the program assign objectives. We're going to deliver that quarter. And he started assigning value to the objectives. So I'm like, hey, Bob, is that a 1 out of 10? Do you care about this? Yeah. No, I don't care about that. Okay, guys, don't do that one. What do you care about, right? And so we started solving his pain points early. And then from there, we went back to Vandenberg and started delivering some code on the, not on the ops floor. It was in a test environment, on class environment. Yeah. But then I brought the operators downstairs and we just kind of tested it out. But then over the months and the, 2 years later, now we finally have, about to decommission that 46-year-old system and replace it.
That's incredible. What a milestone.
Yeah, it's a great story. So we'll talk about that in a future date. Hopefully Bob will come on the show and we could tell that story someday.
Oh, you have to do that. I mean, that's the thing. Some of these bureaucracy hacks, I'm not presenting them as rocket science. I'm not presenting them as anything that I invented, but they work.
Yeah.
Bringing people together.
It's all about
works.
Bringing people together.
Going and talking to the end user. I have so many stories like that from our crisis engineering work as well, where at the end of the day, they're like, well, this other team is the problem. Or, and it's like, have you talked to them? Well, no, but I heard, and then you go to the other team and they're like, nobody has visited me in 10 years, 17 years. We had one where the other team sat across the hallway and nobody had talked to them in 4 years, to include they'd have like bagels, lunches, and whatever, and not invite them. And I was like, oh boy, it's no wonder they're not gonna reach out to you and help you with your problem after this. So
yeah, that's crazy.
Be a human.
It's all about human. I mean, that's why I love agility, right? Because it's like customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Right, so I started a DOSE team, which was the DevOps Center of Excellence. I brought the prime contractor, the program manager from the prime, the subs, the program office, the government, the major, brought them all in every week. We just met for a year and a half and transformed the program, right? But we had that cross-functional alignment, and that was our, our digital transformation, team. So.
And now you have the relationships, and something I've definitely learned the more that I'm in this space is you never know when the last person you worked with is going to be somewhere else in some other role.
Right.
And I'm not saying I have not borked some human relationships in my past, but I'm grateful that for the most part I have good ones, because when they arrive in some new role, that could either really help me or really harm me.
Yeah. I noticed as an agile coach, DevOps coach, we're not really there to make friends. One of the colonels told me that one time. He was like, Heath, you're not here to make friends. I'm like, no, sir, I'm here to deliver capabilities to the warfighters, and that's it, right? So value stream mapping, that's a real kind of near and dear to my heart. Karen Martin wrote a book called Value Stream Mapping.
Yeah.
Love her book, and love to have you on the show, Karen.
It's an incredible book.
Yeah. But so I do a lot of that where you bring people together. But do you have you found value in doing VSM in your organizations, of kind of mapping out the current process and kind of getting people to kind of understand the current process, like all the meetings and the communication, the artifacts, and then understanding the whole cycle time of how to deliver a requirement through the system?
I mean, if I were to summarize what I do, it's that. And so few people ever do it.
Yeah.
We talk about in the book, one of the tactics is look between the silos. And that worked. I mean, it's ridiculous how well it works. It worked at VA. It works in my crisis engineering work. I do a lot of work in the foster care space right now, and it keeps working there because, and this is especially prevalent in government, there's very often nobody who understands or owns the entire end-to-end process. Everybody owns their piece.
Yeah, little piece, yeah.
And when you look across it, so many people want to pick sometimes like either the first step to fix, or they want to pick they want to fix the whole thing, which I think is untenably large. But when you do the value stream mapping, it doesn't matter what the problem is, you're going to find things in between the silos that you can fix and make everybody happy without any pushback. Like nobody is defending that space in between the silos. And if you, like, I guarantee you, if you are going from step 1 to step 2, and a thing I see all the time is they collect information at step 1 that is either deleted at step 2 or it's in a totally wrong format at step 1. So in step 2, they've got to change it up. And this can be as tiny as like first name, last name versus name as a string, or it can be as large as like entire forms of information. And when you can, but the people at step 1 can't see it at step 2 and vice versa. So if you're there looking across them, you can make, I've saved millions of dollars. We've probably saved lives at some points by just looking across and doing that mapping.
That's amazing.
And then that's how you get your caress and you build them up, because then you start showing your map. And then people start reacting to it and saying like, oh, no, that's wrong. If you ask somebody to abstractly design or lay out their process on a blank piece of paper, I found a lot of people find that too overwhelming. But when you give them something and they're like, that's wrong, and then they roll up their sleeves with a marker, that's when I know I'm like in a good spot.
I have there are like so many great stories here. One of them was I had this big like $400 million program. And the chief engineer of the prime was like stuck in his ways. He was not. He was a traditional system engineer. And he wanted to do everything with the big V, right? And just kind of system engineer everything. And so I went out and started meeting with his team. And one of his system engineers gave me the all the documents of the process of all the different meetings and the artifacts. And so I got all of that. And then I went back to the military office, right, at Space Systems Command, and we're the material leader that owns the program, the colonel. And on the wall, I mapped out the entire process in his office, right? And it was 72 meetings that had to take place in order to do concept to code. So not even start coding. This was just the requirements process, 72, a year and a half. And I mapped it out, and I go, sir, if we follow this process, we might get this system done in 2036. Right. And it was like, and then I brought the prime contractor in, which is a top 5 prime, big boys, right, and girls, and brought them in, and he ended up quitting, that system engineer, because he was like, we put him on the spot. I was like, hey, this is your process. And he just was like, I'm not doing this whole thing. I want to do how I want to do it. So,
and sometimes that's what people need to change, though. Like I've also seen, we did a project in our crisis engineering work with the state of California on their backlog of unemployment claims. And we did for the first time out a workflow map of how long it was going to take to go through the work. And when we started, it was going to take them 48 years to work through their current backlog without making any changes to their process. So once understanding that, like, well, that's completely unacceptable, then that opened the door to have conversations of what changes could be made. And it gave us a framework to say, like, this lever, Pareto principle, right? 20% of the change can make 80% of the impact. These are the 2 or 3 things that you've really got to focus on. And it might be more change than you are comfortable with, but we're in a crisis. We got to take advantage of it. And that the 48 years went to 3 months, and they successfully worked it down.
That's
so
great.
I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I love like visualizing the work, showing the backlog, and then getting some real metrics behind it, right?
I love backlogs. I love solving backlogs, I should say.
Yeah. So in the book, I remember I can't remember the exact chapter, but you talked about these kind of like rings, right? Where you have like your family is your first ring. And then you have like your, kind of extended family, and then your friends. And then like in your work environment, when you're trying to navigate bureaucracy, you might not need to rely on everybody in that ring. You might need to go get that receptionist, that executive assistant, or that person that you worked in that other organization. Kind of talking a little bit to the Pentagon leadership here, a little bit on how to kind of navigate that a little bit in the Pentagon. Can you kind of talk maybe a story that is an example of those rings philosophy?
And so I recommend keeping this like to yourself when you're doing it, but making a map of there's the formal org chart that we've all seen, and it definitely exists in DoD, but that's very rarely, if ever, actually how decisions get made. And so you want to lay out like what's the formal org chart, but then you want to start drawing for yourself what is the practical org chart. And a lot of that goes into like who used to work together before, who served together, and they're in completely different roles and completely different parts, but like they have a level of trust and communication that you're never going to supersede. And then also understanding, back to my story about the change control board, is that you don't need unanimous agreement to move forward in many situations. So if you want to think about it as like an advanced logic puzzle, you have to go forward to a decision. There's 10 people that are going to make decisions. You need 7 of those to agree with you. what are the different motivations of each of those people? And this can get really complicated. We have a whole list, I think it's like 3 pages in the book, of different things to consider. Who used to work together, who reports to whom, who has like, a back channel coffee chat once a week that you could leverage. And also who will be influenced by other people.
Yeah, that's huge.
A tiny but really effective tactic I use a lot is when you go to a vote in something, can you strategically line up who goes first? And people often do it as just like how they're sitting around a room, or they don't think about it, how they're sitting around the room or alphabetical order. No. Think thoughtfully about what that order is, because it may entirely change how the vote is, where somebody can't vote no after their boss voted yes, or vice versa ahead of time. Right. And then a lot of that too just goes back to we say a lot like nothing ever happens in meetings. People don't like that. This is probably the bureaucracy hack that people hate the most. But nothing. When you go to a meeting, especially a decision meeting, you should know cold how every single person is going to vote and why. And how can you do all of the pre-work, which might be many, it might be 72 hours, but not over a year and a half, to understand how you can influence them in different ways, or use their relationships for or against one another to get to the outcome that you're looking for, or understand what gap you've got to close or change to get to the outcome that you're looking for.
I love that. I mean, it's all about relationships again, right? And so understanding those relationships ahead of time, I kind of learned the wrong way. As you're telling me that, I'm like, I remember this one time where I was trying to get in touch with this general, but his secretary was friends with this other person that I didn't really get along with, and never got that meeting with that general, right? Because of that. So, no, this was great, Marina. Thanks so much for your time today. I want to just kind of plug your book, right? So Marina Nitze co-authored it with Nick Sinai. Hack Your Bureaucracy. You can get it online on Amazon and all those places, and just a wonderful book. I think for the U.S. government, U.S. military, this is a great book, and so many great lessons to learn about how to kind of navigate the complexity and get things done, right? Get those quick wins, right? Yeah. So Marina, one of the things you mentioned was about the prep, right? Going into these meetings. Yeah. I don't know if I've really spent a lot of time thinking about that and preparing. It sounds like there's a lot of prep that can be involved there. Can you kind of elaborate on that, or maybe a story of how you prepared and how you had some success going into a meeting?
Yeah, for sure. I think we all have been set up by high school debate for failure, because the idea is you're going to give a really persuasive extemporaneous speech, and we're going to persuade everybody in the room, and they're going to vote differently. And that in my experience does not happen. People go in. In fact, there's a ton of academic research around this in sense making by Carl Weck, who has studied that juries, when they enter the deliberation room, already know how they're going to vote. And the process of deliberation is simply them taking facts and fitting them to the narrative in their mind, which I think is a fascinating thing to think about in all sorts of our lives, right?
Yeah, interesting.
So if there's an important meeting to be going into, you want to think about, and I get really nerdy about this. How do people like their briefing materials? Do people need to hear it verbally? Do they need to have a meeting with you? Do they want to read a report? Do they want to look at slides? Who are they going to ask for advice, especially if it's somebody that you don't know and you don't have those pre-existing relationships? Who are they going to be hey, is Marina okay? Or is she crazy or what? And how can you get to that person? Another great tactic is, if you have a friendly in the room, whether or not they're voting, can you plant commentary in them so that they will speak up extemporaneously, but it's actually planned, and say, this worked really well when I did it a year ago. How can you get that social proof? And then order of operations can also matter. Some people will get mad because you didn't loop them in first. Other people don't care so much. So there can become, and I understand this sounds like a complicated math problem, but for really, serious decisions, I think it's worth all these hours. And then the meeting becomes something that you already know how it's going to play out. Yeah. And then hopefully you're also less stressed about it. And to that point, if you going into a meeting knowing, hey, I'm not going to get the votes and here's why, it might not be the time, or you might have to make some concessions. And gosh, that's been a hard thing for me. I want a North Star. I want to accomplish all the goals. But what helps is I know where I'm going, and maybe I have to make some concessions, but I can still make 1 or 2 steps, in the direction that I want. And when people see that you're willing to concede, I think that actually creates a much more collaborative environment.
So kind of having your objective ahead of time, thinking about what you want to achieve, but what you're willing to, concede on a little bit, right?
Absolutely. And when I was moving towards, my vision at VA was one digital experience for veterans, not 1,500, not 83, but there were a million reasons why that was extremely, extremely hard to get to. So, some of my battles early on to shut down websites, I really should have not not picked up. I should have been focused on what can I add to my piece? How can I keep demonstrating this is working? How can I keep getting veterans to come in and say, we had one that we quoted on video saying he'd use our site over anything the VA had to offer. So I considered that at the time an endorsement. Wow. How can we keep building something really great so that these other teams actually want to come work with us instead of me viewing it as like my job is to shut them down.
What? Just remember another story in your book, the website. Could you maybe we'll just kind of close on that? So remember there was the domain that was like va.gov, right? And
I'm so mad about
this. You couldn't get the domain, so you came up with a different one.
Yeah, if anyone listening, this problem can still be solved.
All right, let's solve it.
So va.gov was and always has been the front door to the VA, but when I was starting my new nascent project, there was no world in which va.gov was going to be mine. I had no editing rights of any kind, and they wouldn't really let me near it. So I had to make a new site, and so we were going to do veterans.gov, which, because reasons, the Department of Labor owned.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Department of Labor promised that they were going to give it to me, and then did not. They squatted on my domain name. They still own it to this day.
Come on, Labor.
Tisk.
What's up with that?
Right before we launched on Veterans Day, we had to pivot and get vets.gov, which, was a lesson to me, and also what battle to fight. Because, we were like dragged to the White House every week to have meetings about how VA was going to get veterans.gov back. And at the last minute, I was like, fine, whatever, we're going to do vets.gov and move on. But that's an example where I fought really hard to get that domain name. And to this day, Department of Labor still owns it and should give it back.
All right. Well, maybe we'll go back to DC together and we can try and get that back somehow.
This is my brown M&M test. If somebody can get veterans.gov back to the VA, you can do anything.
Okay, let's do that. That's our mission.
Yeah.
All right.